The man on the platform didn't know who he had just singled out. The tournament staff didn't know. The three judges behind the scoring table didn't know. The coaches lined up along the wall didn't know. The spectators packed into the ballroom tired, hungry, still buzzing from a full day of matches didn't know. Only a handful of people in that room knew the truth. Because in the third row, sitting like he belonged there, was a small man in dark street clothes. No uniform, no belt, no patches, no school logo stitched across his chest. Nothing that said fighter, nothing that said teacher, nothing that said teacher. He looked like a regular spectator, like someone's cousin who came to support a friend, like a guy who wandered in because the hotel lobby sign said National Karate Championship and he wanted to see what that meant. And that was exactly why the champion chose him. Not because he looked strong, not because he looked fast, but because he looked fast, but because he looked harmless. A perfect volunteer, a perfect prop, a perfect way for a champion to prove a point. It happened on Saturday night, March 14th, 1964 at least. That's how the story is usually told in martial arts circles. Some people swear every detail is true. Others say it's grown taller with each retelling, like a campfire legend that refuses to die. But whether you call it history or myth, one thing remains consistent. A champion tried to embarrass a random man. And the room never forgot what happened next. Washington, D.C., the Sheraton Park Hotel. The grand ballroom had been transformed into an arena. Chairs arranged in rows around a raised wooden platform. Bright overhead lights that made the floor shine, air that smelled like old coffee, sweat, and waxed wood. It wasn't the biggest martial arts event in America, but it was close enough to matter. Close enough that serious names showed up. Coaches, referees, competitors from different states, different systems, different rules, different opinions about what real fighting meant. The tournament had started in the morning and ran all day. By night, people were drained, but the kind of drained that still sparks. The kind of tired that turns into electricity when something unexpected happens. And something unexpected was about to happen, because the final event of the evening wasn't another match. It was a demonstration, a special guest appearance by a man whose reputation felt like a law of nature. Victor Moore. If you practiced karate on the East Coast in 1964, you knew that name. Even if you didn't like him, even if you didn't admit it, Victor Moore was feared, not because he fought dirty, not because he played mind games, but because he won, over and over, tournament after tournament. His record wasn't impressive, it was ridiculous. The legend said 33 tournaments, 33 first-place trophies, 11 years without a loss, not just one division, either. He was the kind of champion who made other champions look like beginners. And there was one reason people believed he was unbeatable. One technique, his right leg side kick. He could fire it from a neutral stance, no obvious weight shift, no big hip turn, no dramatic wind-up. 1 second he was still, the next second his foot was in your chest, and you were trying to understand why the ceiling was suddenly the most important thing in your life. Fighters who faced it described it the same way. They never saw it coming, they only felt it. A flat, sudden impact, like being slammed by a door that opened into you at full speed. Victor wasn't small either. He stood tall, carried muscle like it was standard equipment, and had reach that made him feel unfair. When he stood on the platform that night in his crisp white gi and black belt, he looked like the final boss of the karate world. He held the microphone like he had done it 1,000 times, and the room responded exactly the way a room responds to a champion. Applause, respect, a little fear disguised as admiration. Victor smiled and let it fill him up. Then he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I want to show you something." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the voice of someone who never had to beg for attention because his results demanded it. "I want to show you speed, real speed, the kind you don't understand until it's already too late." People leaned in. Victor continued, calm and confident, like he was reading numbers off a scoreboard. "My sidekick is considered the fastest technique in American martial arts." He paused just long enough for that sentence to land. "I'm not the one saying it. The record says it. 33 tournaments. 33 first places. And not once has anyone blocked this kick. The crowd applauded again, a little louder this time. Then Victor did something champions do when they're not just winning, but performing. He decided that winning wasn't enough. He wanted a moment. He wanted the theater. "I don't want to kick a bag," he said. "Anyone can kick a bag. I want you to see what this looks like against a real person." He scanned the room. "I need a volunteer." At first, there was silence, a heavy silence, because the smart fighters in the crowd did mental math. If I go up there, best case I look slow. Worst case I get clipped and become a story people laugh about for years. No one stood. Victor waited. 5 seconds. 10. The silence turned awkward. You could hear chairs creak. You could hear someone cough. You could hear pride fighting with common sense inside 100 different chests. Victor's smile widened. He liked this. He liked the hesitation. It confirmed his greatness before he even moved. Then his eyes dropped to the third row. A young Asian man sitting completely still while everyone else shifted. Dark trousers, dark fitted shirt, no belt, no uniform. A civilian, a perfect target for a controlled demonstration. Victor studied him for a second. Something about the way the man watched didn't feel casual. He wasn't watching like a fan. He was watching like a mechanic staring at an engine, like he was taking the whole machine apart in his head. But Victor didn't stop to wonder why. He didn't stop because he needed a volunteer, and because in his mind, anyone could be a volunteer. So he pointed. "You," he said, microphone raised. "Third row, the little guy." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, light and easy, because everyone understood the script. Champion invites volunteer. Champion dazzles audience. Volunteer looks surprised. Everyone claps. Victor leaned into it. "How about it? Want to see the fastest kick in America up close?" The man in the third row didn't laugh. He looked at Victor, looked at the platform, looked at the judges and the audience and the way the room was now waiting for him. Then he said one word. "Sure." Not loud, not dramatic. He said it like someone agreeing to pass the salt. The man beside him, compact, alert, Filipino, grabbed his arm instantly. A warning grip, like he was trying to pull him back into the chair. "Bruce," the man whispered, "don't." Bruce Lee looked at him. His expression didn't change. He gently removed the hand from his arm and stood up anyway. "It would be rude not to answer," he said quietly. The Filipino man, Dan Inosanto, closed his eyes for a moment. Not because he feared for Bruce, because he feared for the champion who had just invited him onto the platform. Bruce Lee started walking forward. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He moved smoothly, like water sliding through gaps in stone. People shifted their legs to let him pass, barely looking at him. To them, he was still a nobody, just a small volunteer walking toward a stage. In 1964, Bruce Lee wasn't famous in America. No magazine covers, no movie roles, no television legend. He was only 23, the young instructor running a small martial arts school in Oakland, teaching Wing Chun to a handful of students. He had returned to the United States with almost nothing, some clothes, a small amount of money, and a level of understanding about combat that most people in that ballroom had never even considered. But the people who had seen it couldn't forget it. One of them was in the front row, Ed Parker, a respected martial artist and event organizer, the kind of man who built bridges between styles. Parker had seen Bruce demonstrate months earlier on the West Coast, and whatever he witnessed there had kept him awake at night. Parker had invited Bruce to this tournament as an observer, to network, to watch American karate culture up close. Not to fight, not to challenge anyone. Definitely not to step onto a platform with the most feared point fighter in the country. So when Ed Parker saw Victor Moore pointed Bruce Lee, his stomach dropped. He leaned toward the man beside him. "Oh no," Parker murmured. The man frowned. "What?" Parker didn't know how to compress the truth into one sentence. He didn't know how to explain the storm inside that small, calm-looking volunteer. So he said the simplest version. Victor just made the worst mistake of his life. Bruce reached the platform, climbed the steps, and stepped into the light. For the first time that night, the contrast became obvious. Victor Moore stood tall, broad, and polished in his white gi and black belt. Bruce Lee stood smaller in street clothes, dark and plain, like a man who had walked onto the wrong stage. The room saw it like a cartoon, and cartoons have a clear expectation. The small guy loses. Victor extended his hand. Bruce shook it. Victor felt something he didn't expect: strength. Not showy strength, not crushing, just a firm grip that felt like grasping warm iron. Victor noticed Bruce's forearms too, thick, dense, like they were built by hours of specific work, but Victor dismissed it instantly. Forearms don't stop sidekicks. Victor tilted his head, smiling. "What's your name, my friend?" "Bruce Lee." The name meant nothing to him. He had never heard it in the world that mattered to him: tournaments, belts, trophies, scorecards. He asked another question. "Do you practice martial arts?" "Yes." "What style?" "Chinese martial arts." Victor nodded politely, but inside, he carried the common opinion of that era. In the American karate community of 1964, Kung Fu was often seen as decorative, beautiful, dramatic, full of stances and flowing movements. But practical? A lot of them didn't believe that. Victor turned to the crowd and lifted the microphone again. "Folks, we have a brave volunteer," he announced. "Bruce Lee. He practices Chinese martial arts. Let's give him a round of applause for his courage." Polite clapping. And something else beneath it. Pity. The audience felt sorry for him. They assumed he didn't understand what he'd agreed to. Victor leaned closer, dropping his voice so only Bruce could hear. "Listen," he said. "I'll hold back. I won't hit you. Just try to block or dodge, all right? It'll be over quickly." Bruce looked up at him, calm, still, almost patient. "Yes," Bruce said. And something in the way he said it made Victor pause for a fraction of a second. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't nervousness. It wasn't confidence either. Not the loud kind. It was certainty. Victor shook it off, stepped back, and prepared his stance. Bruce didn't. Bruce remained relaxed, hands at his sides, feet planted, no defensive posture. He looked like a man waiting for the bus. 300 people held their breath. The judges leaned forward. Dan Inosanto covered part of his face with his hand, but left space between his fingers because he couldn't not watch. Ed Parker pressed his palms together. Victor Moore, 33-time champion, shifted his weight, took a breath, and launched the fastest sidekick in American karate at the random man in street clothes. Victor Moore's sidekick left the floor like a trigger had been pulled. No shout, no warning step, no visible wind-up. Just motion. His hip snapped, his leg drove forward, and the distance between champion and volunteer collapsed in a blur of white fabric and muscle memory. It was the same kick that had won tournaments, the same kick that had ended matches before opponents finished their first thought. From the audience, it looked unstoppable. From the judges' table, it looked clean. From Victor's perspective, it looked finished. But from Bruce Lee's perspective, it looked late. Because Bruce didn't move backward. He moved forward. Not a jump, not a lunge, a short, precise step that cut the distance instead of giving it away. His body shifted on a narrow line, just off the center of the kick's path. Not enough to be dramatic, just enough to make the attack miss its target by inches. At the same time, his lead hand touched Victor's leg. Not a block, a guide. A redirection so small most people in the room didn't even register it as contact. Victor's kick extended fully, but there was no body behind the space where Bruce had been. Bruce was already inside. Already past the line where the kick had power. Alone entries, creating rules rarely allowed anyone to reach. His right fist stopped less than an inch from Victor Moore's face, not swinging, not trembling, placed there, like a period at the end of a sentence. The entire exchange took less than half a second, but silence took longer, because the room couldn't process what it had just seen. Victor lowered his leg slowly, His brain was trying to replay the sequence and failing to find the missing frames. From his perspective, the kick had been perfect. The timing had been right, the distance had been right. So why was the volunteer standing inside his reach, with a fist parked in front of his nose? Bruce withdrew his hand and stepped back calmly, giving space, like a teacher resetting a demonstration. No celebration, no grin, no pose. The audience didn't clap, they didn't cheer. They made a sound instead, the low, confused murmur of people whose expectations had just been broken at the structural level. Victor blinked twice. "You moved early," he said quietly, not into the microphone, just to Bruce. "Yes," Bruce replied, "you moved first." Victor frowned. "Everyone moves first." Bruce shook his head slightly. "Everyone prepares first." That answer didn't land yet. Not fully. It would later. Right now, Victor felt something unfamiliar pressing against his ribs from the inside. Doubt. He turned to the audience with a quick smile, trying to re-anchor the moment. "Fast," he said into the microphone, forcing lightness into his tone. "He's quick. Let's try again." There was a faint edge to his voice now. The edge of a man who didn't like variables. He reset his stance deeper this time, more deliberate. He would add speed, add commitment, remove margin. Bruce remained relaxed. Still no guard raised, still no karate stance. Just a narrow, balanced posture that looked almost casual. From the front row, Ed Parker exhaled slowly through his nose. He recognized what the crowd didn't yet understand. Victor was about to try harder. That would make this worse. Victor fired the second kick. Faster, harder, more committed. Bruce stepped in again, but this time the room could see more of it. His lead foot slid forward on a straight line. His torso rotated slightly, and both hands came alive. One hand brushed the incoming leg off its line. The other touched Victor's chest, 2 fingers extended. Not a strike, a marker, a message. This is where it would land. Victor felt the contact before he understood the path that led to it. His balance tilted. His planted foot scrambled to recover. He set himself down instead of falling, but the recovery was visible. Very visible. A champion offline, a volunteer in control of the distance. The murmur grew louder. Chairs creaked. Someone near the back said, "What just happened?" out loud without meaning to. Victor stepped back fully now. No microphone smile. No showman tone. He was studying Bruce with new eyes. "Do it again," Victor said, voice low. Bruce nodded once. "Anytime." They reset, but before Victor could launch, a new movement entered the scene. Ed Parker stood up and walked toward the stage. He wasn't rushing, but he wasn't strolling either. He moved with purpose, the way a man moves when he sees a moment turning into something bigger than a simple demonstration. He stepped up, reached for the microphone gently, and Victor handed it over without protest. That alone told the judges something had shifted. "Ladies and gentlemen," Parker said, voice steady and warm, "I think we're seeing something special here." The room quieted, not fully, but enough. For those who may not know, this is Bruce Lee, a martial arts instructor from Oakland, California. The name moved through the crowd like a dropped coin noticed, but not yet valued. Parker continued. He's been developing an approach to combat that focuses on interception, directness, and economy of motion. Several karate practitioners exchanged skeptical looks. Economy of motion sounded like a polite phrase for cutting corners. Bruce accepted the microphone when Parker offered it, but he didn't step forward dramatically. He stood where he was, centered, composed. "What you saw," Bruce said, "was not speed versus speed." His voice was calm, almost conversational. It was timing versus preparation. The room leaned in again. "Most techniques begin with a preparation," Bruce said. "A weight shift, a turn, a small loading of the body before the action. That preparation is information." He tapped his own forearm lightly, and information can be read. A judge in the second row frowned, thinking. Bruce continued. "If I wait for the kick, I am late. If I move when you prepare the kick, I am early." Victor listened like a student now, not a star. "Preparation is a message," Bruce said. I answer the message, not the technique. He handed the microphone back to Parker. Parker smiled slightly. He knew the room needed proof, not poetry. Would you be willing to show that again? Parker asked. Bruce nodded. Victor spoke before Parker chose a format. Full speed, Victor said. No pulling back. Parker looked at Bruce. Bruce answered simply, "Okay." The air changed. Even the spectators who didn't fully understand what was happening could feel the temperature drop. This was no longer entertainment. This was a test. Victor set his stance for the third time. Deeper, sharper, more intent than before. Bruce shifted into a slight guard, now hands alive, not high. Elbows relaxed, center line covered without tension. Victor launched. Bruce didn't step away. He cut the line. His lead foot drove forward as his body angled just outside the kick's center. His forearm met the leg with a soft deflection, not force against force, angle against direction. His rear hand shot forward along the shortest path available. It stopped at Victor's throat, not touching, hovering. Victor froze, not because of pain, because of realization. If that hand had closed instead of paused, the match would have ended before the kick completed its extension. The room went completely silent. No murmur this time, no whispers, just 300 people holding one shared breath. Bruce withdrew again. Victor lowered his leg slowly and exhaled through his teeth. "That's not karate," someone said from the crowd, not as an insult, but as a confused observation. Bruce answered without looking. "No," he said. "It's fighting." That line traveled. It moved across the room like a current. Victor surprised everyone next. He bowed slightly toward Bruce. Not theatrical, not exaggerated, respectful. "Show them more," Victor said. He meant it. Parker stepped back. The platform was Bruce's now. Bruce looked at Victor. "May I touch your arms?" Victor nodded and raised them. Bruce placed his forearms lightly against Victor's. "Try to touch my face," Bruce said. Victor attacked with quick hand strikes, controlled, tournament safe, but fast. He couldn't land one. Every attempt slid into empty space or met structure already in place. Bruce's hands didn't chase, they occupied. They arrived where the openings formed, often before Victor finished creating them. To the untrained eye, it looked like Bruce was guessing correctly every time. To the trained eye, it looked worse. It looked like he wasn't guessing at all. "This is sensitivity," Bruce said quietly while the drill continued. "When there is contact, there is information. When there is information, there is prediction." Victor tried faster combinations. Nothing landed. Bruce tapped Victor's chest lightly 3 separate times between attempts. Not strikes, notes, markers, proof of access. Victor dropped his hands and laughed once under his breath, not with embarrassment but with astonishment. "I can't catch you," he said. Bruce shook his head. "You're trying to catch hands. Don't catch hands, catch intent." The phrase hung in the air like a puzzle. Parker looked out at the audience and knew exactly what was happening. Worldviews were cracking, and once cracked, they never sealed the same way again. Bruce turned back to Victor. "One more demonstration," he said. "Stand firm." Victor planted his feet. Bruce placed his fist close to Victor's chest, barely any distance between them. A few people in the audience leaned forward, confused. There was no room for power, no room for momentum. Bruce aligned his body quietly, ankle, knee, hip, spine, shoulder, fist-like links in one straight chain. Then he struck, short, sharp, compact. Victor left the ground, not high, not dramatic, but undeniably airborne, before landing backward into a chair that folded under him with a loud snap. The room erupted. Not polite applause, noise, shock noise, standing noise, pointing fingers and open mouths and disbelieving laughter. Bruce stepped forward and helped Victor up immediately. No victory pose, no triumph, just courtesy. Victor looked at him and shook his head slowly. "1 inch, Victor said. Bruce answered, "Whole body." Victor Moore stood upright again, but something fundamental had shifted, not his balance, not his stance, his identity. For 11 years he had been the man others studied, the man others tried to solve, the measuring stick, the final exam. Fighters entered brackets hoping they wouldn't meet him too early. Now he was looking at a smaller man in street clothes like a student looks at a blackboard. Not threatened, hungry. The applause in the ballroom kept rolling in uneven waves. Some people stood. Some stayed seated but clapped hard. Others didn't clap at all. They just stared, arms folded, replaying what they had seen with stubborn disbelief. Bruce waited for the sound to fade. He didn't raise his hands to quiet the room. He didn't need to. Stillness spread outward from him like a signal. When the noise lowered enough, Ed Parker handed him the microphone again. "Would you explain it?" Parker asked, for those who were trying to understand what they just saw. Bruce nodded once. He turned slowly, not like a performer working a crowd, but like a teacher making eye contact with a class. "What you saw," Bruce said, "is not about being faster than him." He gestured lightly toward Victor. "He is fast, very fast. If I try to beat his kick with a later reaction, I lose." Several karate practitioners in the front rows gave small, reluctant nods. That part made sense. Bruce continued, "So I don't react to the kick." He let that sit. "I react to the beginning of the intention." A few brows furrowed. Bruce stepped to the center of the platform and demonstrated with exaggerated slowness. When most fighters attack, their body tells a story first. The shoulder tightens, the hip loads, the weight shifts, the breath changes. These are signals, small but real. He pointed gently toward the crowd. "You are trained to watch the weapon, the fist, the foot. I watch the body." He tapped his own chest. "The weapon is late. The body is early." The judges exchanged glances now. This wasn't show talk. This was structure talk. Bruce looked back at Victor. "Please sidekick again. Slow this time." Victor complied without hesitation. He moved through the motion at half speed. Bruce stopped him midway with 2 fingers against the hip. "Here," Bruce said. "The kick already exists here before the leg leaves the ground." He withdrew his hand. "If I move now, I arrive before the kick becomes dangerous." A coach near the aisle whispered, "Intercept the setup," like he was writing a mental note. Bruce heard it and gave a slight nod. "Yes," he said. "Intercept the setup." He didn't name styles. He didn't compare systems. He spoke in principles. "Styles are containers," Bruce continued. "Principles are liquid. They must be able to move." That line hit harder than some of the techniques, because many of the people in that room had built their identities around containers, systems, ranks, uniforms, traditions. Liquid sounded dangerous. Bruce set the microphone down on the edge of the platform. "Let's make this simpler." He faced Victor again. "Punch at my face. Anytime." Victor threw a clean, straight reverse punch, fast, direct, tournament sharp. Bruce's hand cut the line before the punch reached halfway. A small parry redirected the strike just enough, and his other hand touched Victor's chin lightly. Again a marker. Again access. They reset. Victor punched again with a different rhythm. Same result. Third time Victor feinted high and changed line. Bruce didn't chase the feint. His structure stayed centered. His hand intercepted the real line when it appeared. Touch. Marker. Proof. The audience watched with a different kind of attention now. Not excitement analysis. Bruce spoke while they worked. "Do not chase hands," he said. "Chase position. Control the line between us, and the hands solve themselves." He stepped back and let Victor relax. "Most fighters try to be faster. I try to be earlier." He picked the microphone up again. "Earlier beats faster." That sentence traveled through the room and stayed there. A referee near the judges' table repeated it quietly to himself like a formula. Victor wiped his brow with the back of his wrist and surprised everyone again. "Can I ask?" Victor said. Bruce turned. "Yes." "That short punch," Victor said. "The one that moved me. Do it again, but explain it." Bruce smiled slightly, not proudly, but approvingly. That was the right question. He stepped close and placed his fist near Victor's chest again. "This is misunderstood," Bruce said to the room. "People think power comes from distance." He shook his head. "Power comes from connection." He adjusted his rear foot a fraction, turned his hip a few degrees, lengthened his spine, Ground, he said. Leg, hip, back, shoulder, arm, fist. One line, one moment. He looked at Victor. Ready. Victor braced. Bruce drove the strike. Short, tight, integrated. Victor rocked backward again, not flying this time but forced into a step he hadn't planned to take. Bruce kept hold of his sleeve so he wouldn't stumble into the edge of the platform. No humiliation, only demonstration. Bruce turned back to the audience. If one link in the chain is loose, the power leaks, he said. If all links connect at once, distance is not required. A man in the fourth row, older, gray at the temples, traditionalist posture, crossed his arms harder. This breaks rules, he said aloud. Bruce looked directly at him. Yes, Bruce answered calmly. Some rules should be broken, not shouted, not defiant, stated like weather. Parker hid a smile. Bruce continued. I respect tradition, he said, but tradition should be a starting point, not a cage. The gray-templed man didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. Bruce shifted the energy again before resistance could grow. Let me show you sensitivity. He raised his forearms and invited Victor to connect again, forearm to forearm. From here, Bruce said, do not look, feel. Victor attacked with short bursts. Bruce's arms flowed, deflected, entered. No wasted motion, no collisions, just angles and timing. Tap to chest, tap to shoulder, tap to throat, line stopped short. This training, Bruce said, teaches you to read pressure, direction, tension, before speed matters. A young competitor near the front whispered, he's not blocking. Bruce heard him. Bruce heard him. Yes, Bruce said. Arriving. Victor finally laughed openly now. I feel slow, Victor admitted. Bruce shook his head. You feel predictable, he corrected gently. Victor nodded. He accepted that. The correction didn't wound him. It freed him. Bruce stepped back and addressed the room one more time, voice warmer now. I am not here to say karate is wrong, or kung fu is right, or any style is superior. He scanned the faces. I am here to say no style is complete. That landed heavier than any strike. Every system has strengths. Every system has limits. Growth begins where certainty ends. Silence again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was reflection. People were no longer trying to defend their systems in their heads. They were testing their assumptions against what they had just seen. Bruce bowed slightly toward Victor. Your speed is real, Bruce said. Your discipline is real. Your record is real. Victor bowed back. But fighting, Bruce added softly, is bigger than records. No one clapped yet, because it didn't feel like a performance ending. It felt like a door opening. From the third row, Danina Santo finally dropped his hand from his face completely. He had been half watching, half waiting for the emotional backlash that sometimes follows public revelations. It hadn't come. Not yet. Instead, curiosity was winning. That was rare. Parker stepped forward and took the microphone one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, you've just witnessed something you will be talking about for a long time. He turned toward Bruce. Bruce Lee. Now the applause came again, but different. Not for spectacle, for understanding, longer, deeper, more deliberate. Bruce bowed small, precise, respectful, and stepped back from the center of the platform. He didn't linger in the spotlight. He moved toward the steps, back toward the third row, back toward being nobody in street clothes. But the room no longer saw him that way. Hands reached out as he passed, quick handshakes, quiet questions, nods of respect from people who would have ignored him an hour earlier. Victor remained on the platform, watching him go, not with resentment, not with embarrassment, with gratitude. Because champions rarely get what Victor received that night, not defeat, clarity. The tournament officially ended 40 minutes later. Trophies were handed out, names were called, cameras flashed, applause rose and fell in polite cycles as divisions were recognized and brackets finalized. The announcer's voice echoed across a room that was already mentally somewhere else, because no one was talking about the winners. They were talking about the interruption, the volunteer, the interception, the short punch, the champion being stopped before his technique even existed. Clusters of martial artists stood in tight circles, replaying the exchange with their hands in the air, recreating angles, arguing about timing, disagreeing about distance. No, he stepped inside before the hip. "You're missing it." He read the weight shift. That punch had no chamber, none. That's impossible without setup. Belief systems were being stress tested in real time. Some rejected what they saw outright. Called it a trick, a cooperative demo, a staged moment. It was easier that way. Easier than restructuring years of training around a new idea. Others said nothing, but their silence was active. You could see them storing the memory carefully, like evidence they would examine later in private. On the far side of the ballroom, Bruce Lee sat back down beside Dan Inosanto like the night was ordinary. No victory posture. No storyteller's grin. No replaying his own moment. Dan leaned closer. "You just changed the room," Dan said quietly. Bruce shook his head once. "The room was ready," he replied. "I only showed them a mirror." Dan smiled. He had heard lines like that before. Bruce didn't speak in slogans. He spoke in compressed ideas. "You know they won't stop talking about this," Dan added. Bruce looked ahead, watching two coaches argue with intense politeness. "Talking is fine," Bruce said. "Training is better." Across the room, Victor Moore accepted his trophy for the final division of the night, his 34th consecutive tournament victory. The applause was strong, respectful, deserved. But it sounded different now, not smaller, just contextualized. Victor shook hands, posed for a photograph, thanked the officials, and then, instead of staying to celebrate, he stepped down from the platform and walked toward the exit. He carried no trophy with him. He left it sitting on the judges' table. Outside, the March night air felt cool and thin after the packed ballroom. The hotel parking lot was half lit by tall yellow lamps that cast long shadows across the pavement. Car doors slammed in the distance. Trunks opened and closed. Equipment bags were loaded with tired satisfaction. Bruce stood beside a rented sedan, placing a small training bag into the trunk. Dan sat in the passenger seat, window down, listening to the night. Footsteps approached on asphalt. Bruce turned. Victor Moore was still wearing his gi and black belt. No jacket over it, no trophy in his hands. Just the uniform and a different expression than the one he wore on stage earlier. Less certain, more honest. "Mr. Lee," Victor said. Bruce closed the trunk gently. "Yes, I owe you an apology," Victor said without hesitation. Bruce waited. He didn't wave it off. He didn't rush to soften it. He let the sentence stand and invited the truth behind it to arrive fully. "I picked you because you looked small," Victor continued. "Because you looked safe. Because I thought using you would make the demonstration more impressive." Bruce nodded once, not offended, just acknowledging reality. "I underestimated you," Victor said. "Completely." Bruce answered calmly. "Most people underestimate what they don't measure correctly." Victor let out a short breath through his nose, a half laugh at himself. "For 11 years, Victor said, I thought winning meant understanding. Tonight I realized I understand tournaments. Rules. Timing under rules. But what you showed, that's outside the rule book." Bruce leaned lightly against the car door. "Rules are useful," Bruce said, "but fights don't read them." The parking lot was quiet except for a distant engine turning over. Victor looked directly at him. "Can you teach me that?" he asked, not arrogantly, not challengingly, plainly. Bruce studied his face, not posture, not build, not rank, eyes, attitude, flexibility. "You don't need a new teacher," Bruce said at last. Victor frowned slightly. "No, you need a new question." Victor waited. "For years," Bruce continued, "your question has been, how do I win?" Victor nodded slowly. That was true. "That question builds skill," Bruce said, "but it also builds walls." He pushed off the car and stood straight. "The better question is, what am I missing?" Victor repeated it under his breath once, like he was testing the weight of it. "What am I missing?" he said. Bruce continued, "When you ask that honestly, every opponent becomes information. Every style becomes a reference. Every mistake becomes instruction." Victor's shoulders lowered a fraction, not defeated, but relieved, like someone who realized the road didn't end where he thought it did. "I felt something tonight," Victor admitted. "Not embarrassment, not anger." He searched for the word. "Space," he finished, like the map got bigger. Bruce smiled slightly. That was the correct sensation. "Good," Bruce said. "Keep that feeling. That is where growth lives." Victor extended his hand. Bruce shook it. This time the handshake was different on both sides. Not introduction, not performance. Agreement, respect without hierarchy. "Thank you," Victor said. Bruce answered, "Thank you for the invitation." Victor stepped back, then paused. "One more thing," he said. "When you stepped in on the kick, it felt like you weren't racing me." "I wasn't," Bruce replied. "I was meeting you." Victor nodded slowly, absorbing that. He turned and walked back toward the hotel without looking over his shoulder. Dan leaned out the window. "You just recruited a champion," Dan said. Bruce got into the driver's seat. "No," Bruce answered. "He recruited himself." The engine started. They rolled slowly toward the exit lane. "You realize what happens now," Dan added. "Everyone in that ballroom tells 2 people. Those 2 people tell 4. By next month, every serious martial artist on the East Coast knows your name." Bruce watched the road ahead, not the mirrors. "Good," he said quietly. Dan glanced over. "Good?" Bruce nodded. "Next time," he said, "they won't choose me because I look harmless." The car turned out of the lot and disappeared into the Washington night. Behind them, in the Sheraton Park Hotel ballroom, staff folded chairs and stacked them against the walls. The platform was dismantled piece by piece. Lights dimmed. The arena returned to being just a room. But conversations did not stop. Not that night. Not that week. Not for decades. Because stories travel fastest when they challenge certainty. And this story carried a simple, unsettling lesson. A champion chose a random man to prove a point and discovered the point was choosing him back. Years later, people would argue about details, dates, sequences, exact words spoken. Memory always edits, legends always compress, but the core of the story never changes in martial arts circles. A small man without a uniform stepped onto a stage. A dominant fighter attacked with his best weapon, and the attack was intercepted before it was born. Not by magic, not by luck, by understanding. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is not the loudest, the biggest, or the most decorated. Sometimes he's the one you invite up because he looks like nobody.